Hi, welcome to the July Kern Fire Safe Council webinar. We're here today with our partner Kern County Fire Department, represented by Public Information Officer Andrew Freeborn. Thanks for being back with us again, Officer Freeborn. So as always, if you have questions, please write them in the chat and we'll answer as many of them as we can as we go along. And today we're going to be talking about preventing vehicle fires. And why we thought this was a really important topic to talk about right now is because we have had so many recent fires, in particular the Yankee fire in Kernville in June, the fire along the Grapevine in Lebec, the fire in Hungry Valley on the 4th of July. All of these fires were caused by vehicles starting to burn. So this is really important. We're, one article that I saw stated that a car catches fire every 17 minutes in the United States. And in 2020, FEMA statistics show that 62% of vehicle fires start in the engine. So learning how to prevent vehicle fires is really important, because if you don't know, like I learned a lesson the hard way about checking the radiator when I was going to be taking a drive up a steep incline. I learned that the hard way. Luckily, my car didn't start on fire, but I learned now that if I'm going to be driving in the hills, I need to check the radiator and make sure there's enough fluid in there. So without further ado, we're going to find out right now how you and I can prevent vehicle fires. So, Officer Freeborn, I'm handing this over to you now.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you for the introduction. The points that you mentioned, absolutely important, and I'm happy that that instance that you were speaking of personally didn't end up in a fire. Yeah. We've all experienced, right, mechanical problems with our vehicles at some point if we've traveled. Whether it's a flat tire. I just got a flat tire in the fire department vehicle last week on an emergency incident. So we certainly were using our vehicles for personal, for pleasure, for work, for travel, whatever it may be. And they certainly add to our quality of life. But as was mentioned, there are times that we have seen that problems have occurred through the operation of motor vehicles on our highways. We often might think of car accidents. Let's avoid car accidents. And so certainly we want to remind individuals to not drive distracted, to wear their seat belts, to be cautious of road conditions, obey the posted traffic speed limits. We don't want to see people getting in wrecks. But really today we're going to focus on being able to kind of have a few things in the back of our mind that potentially could give individuals the needed checklist so that they might avoid some sort of fire or some sort of accident occurring that could injure themselves, others, or start a fire. So what I'd like to do is I will change my background here as we go through this presentation, and we'll touch on a few of these points. I may have to readjust my seating here slightly.
And just so you know, Chief Kennison has just joined us too.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Chief Kennison, for joining us. And certainly he will be a great safety net for me if I go off the reservation too far. He knows considerably more than I do. So certainly, Chief Kennison, if you see something that I need to correct, be sure to let me know. But first and foremost, one of the things that we see that can cause issues with individuals traveling on our highways is their tire condition. In the fire service, we're constantly looking at inspecting our vehicles, inspecting the apparatus. We would want to get in the same habit in our own households. When we're looking at our tires, looking at the condition of them overall, we want to make sure that they're inflated to the proper PSI as it states on the sidewall. We're going to check our tires for condition. Are there cracks on the sidewall? Are there big lugs or chunks that are taken out of the tread? Are there nails or screws in the tire? Is there something that doesn't seem right with that condition of the tire? We'd also want to check for appropriate tread depth and wear. Do we see that the tires are bald? Is there metal, that steel belt that's showing in other areas? If we're looking at this checklist before we head out on a trip, especially in our summer months, we're helping ourselves to be prepared so that we avoid an emergency that's going to befall us potentially. If we see an issue with inflation, make sure to inflate it correctly. A lot of gas stations still have the inflation area that you can go ahead and correct the PSI in your tires. When it comes to condition, tread wear, depth, all of that, that may require going to a tire shop and actually replacing those tires. But if we don't do this, what could happen? You could have a tire that bursts, that pops while you're driving down the roadway. That could cause you to go out of control. That could cause that tire to start shredding apart after it pops. And now you're going down the side of the road, trying to bring it to a stop and potentially throwing sparks that could ignite a fire in dry grass. So that's one thing that we will want to look at when considering our vehicle maintenance to avoid starting fires. Another area is the vehicle's cooling system itself. As was mentioned by Julia before we had started, she had traveled up a steep grade at one point in time, potentially overheating the car. It did not get to the point of having a vehicle fire. But nonetheless, these are some things that we can do occasionally. Pop the hood of our car. The best thing to do is when the vehicle is parked on level ground, when the vehicle is completely cool, when it's been able to sit overnight perhaps. That way, as you're using the owner's manual of your vehicle to look at the appropriate specs, you're looking at how to appropriately check your radiator fluid level. You're not going to do so in a way that would potentially burn you or expose you to harsh chemicals. But we want to make sure that we're checking that radiator fluid. We want to look at the radiator itself. The water pump is usually located near the front of the engine in a lot of makes of vehicles. You may not be able to identify that itself, but you don't have to be super mechanically inclined. If you look over the engine, you look over the radiator, the hoses that are coming in and out of it, does anything stand out of the ordinary as not being correct? Are hoses split open? Do we see drips coming off of the radiator? Do we see damage to the radiator or any of those hoses in and around it? Those are indications that we may need to seek professional help. We may need to get the vehicle to a mechanic to have these items addressed so that the vehicle can be operated safely. And then while we're traveling, monitor the vehicle's temperature. If you are traveling and you notice the temperature is starting to climb, you may need to pull over carefully to the side of a road, on the shoulder, on perhaps a rest stop area, park the vehicle, open the hood, turn it off, let it cool off, bring that temperature back down before we start down the highway again. So that's another area that we can keep those points in mind. Another factor is the exhaust system. This would be the exhaust manifolds, the exhaust system itself, the catalytic converter, the muffler. One of the things that we are looking for here is, once again, we would want to do this with the vehicle level. We would want to make sure that we maybe used a mirror or something so that some vehicles are low to the ground, we can't get underneath them. Make sure that the vehicle is chocked, the emergency brake's on, it's in park. You want to inspect underneath that vehicle, though, to see is the exhaust system intact? Are all of the areas where it's the hangers, where they're attaching to the vehicle, are they all still in place, or is something hanging and loose? Are there holes? Are there rusted out spots? If you start to notice some of these items, you could have a catalytic converter that's going bad, and that could eventually throw out debris as you're traveling down the road that's hot. Those embers could ignite light grasses along the roadway if it's not properly taken care of. If those hangers or other components of your exhaust system are damaged, it could come loose while it's vibrating, driving down the road, hitting bumps. And now you've got this large pieces of metal that are actually dragging under your vehicle, once again, throwing sparks. So we want to avoid throwing sparks, embers being pushed out of the exhaust system. So make a good inspection of your exhaust system. Another area that we want to discuss is if we need to pull off, there are some things to keep in mind to do so safely. We understand that there are times that the vehicle, the conditions, whatever is occurring, doesn't lend itself to giving you a lot of time to think about and drive down the road. Is this a good spot? Is that a good spot? And we understand there are some circumstances that that vehicle, it's all an individual can do to simply pull to the side of the highway. But when we can, we want to try to make sure that we're in an area that's not right after a curve, where it's a blind area that someone coming around the curve may not see us. You want to make sure whenever we can that it's in a nice wide area, paved or dirt area, not over grasses. Make sure if we can that it's not uphill or downhill too severely. That way we can get out and the car is safely going to stay at rest and not roll away if we need to get out of the vehicle and work on it. We want to watch for debris when we're pulling off the roadways. We've all seen it throughout the state, throughout our own county here, that there are areas that we see as we drive down the road. There's the retread from diesel trucks along the highway. There are other things that might fall off of vehicles. There could potentially be pieces of vehicles left over after vehicle accidents. All of these things are hazards because as we pull off the road, they could pop our tires. They could become lodged underneath our vehicle, which would then run the risk of us dragging something across the roadway that could start throwing sparks, could ignite oil on our car on fire. Now the vehicle's on fire, it could throw sparks out, igniting that grass on the side of the roadway. So we want to be careful about debris when we're pulling over. And if there's a lot of dry grass, do our best not to park over that dry grass. You have to think of it this way. That car is hot. We wouldn't want to reach in and pop the hood after we've been driving it in the summer heat, driving up the grapevine. We would never think about touching that vehicle, that engine, because it's so hot. And to put it into perspective, a lot of vehicles operate at around 210 degrees, 190 degrees, right in that area there. Well, water boils at 212 degrees. If a vehicle is overheated and the person has to pull over, oftentimes the vehicle is well exceeded 212 degrees. We wouldn't stick our hand in a pot of boiling water. We certainly wouldn't. And so we wouldn't want to touch any of that area around the engine bay, any of those engine components when they're that hot. And the exhaust system often is much more hot, much higher temperatures even than that engine itself. So if we were to park over dry grasses, we run the risk that those dry grasses touching those hot components under the car could ignite a fire. The key point here about pulling over is know your location. A lot of times we're talking to people in the car, we're listening to our music, we're thinking about our trip, whatever we're doing. We may not be paying the closest attention to where we're actually at. And that's very important if an emergency occurs to relay that information to the emergency communication center. That way there's less chances of delay in getting the needed assistance to you. So as you're traveling, try to think about where you're at. Did we just pass Panama Lane? Did we just pass Highway 223? Did we just pass the interchange of 99 and I-5 merging together? Some of these things, that way we can kind of at least give an individual a better idea of where we're at. We're approximately a mile or two north of the split of the I-5-99. We're on 99 or we're on I-5. Those are all things that are extremely helpful to getting help to people in the event of an emergency. Another thing that we can do to help minimize vehicle fires is keeping a fire extinguisher in our vehicle. By having a fire extinguisher that's there and it's readily available, sometimes we can extinguish that fire safely ourselves before it becomes too well established for us to extinguish ourselves. We certainly want to encourage individuals to get to safety. And if they feel that it is unsafe for them to try to extinguish that fire, we don't want individuals to hurt themselves trying to do so. But if you see a small fire that's just beginning, by having that extinguisher there, that empowers you to be able to extinguish that fire before the whole vehicle is ablaze and potentially other areas around it that could ignite as well. In On this topic of keeping extinguishers in your car, we also listed here, keep a go bag with you. In your go bag, it's always good to have that because you never know what emergencies you might experience when you're on the side of the road. Having that extra water, food there in case you're waiting for someone to come assist you. But even in that go bag, its primary use is for your physical health. But if you have a sizable amount of water as part of your assortment of supplies, you may even be able to use some of that water to douse that fire out if you can do so safely. Another area when it comes to motorized vehicles of some type starting fires is that from off-road vehicles, off-highway vehicles, ATVs, the spark arresters on there. We would want to make sure that they're installed, they're maintained, and they're working effectively. And for that, we would definitely want to look into the manufacturer's recommendations, manufacturer's instructions. There's so many out there, but put forth the effort in advance. Once again, with that vehicle maintenance, inspecting that off-highway vehicle to make sure if we are operating it off-highway, that it's not going to run the risk of igniting a fire. The two other things that came to my mind as we were discussing these slides right now, one of them being is when we're towing a trailer. Another thing that we have seen over the years is the safety chains that connect the trailer to the tow vehicle. Sometimes these are at a length that's not appropriate, or the vehicle is overloaded and it's sitting lower at the tongue than it normally would. And so now those chains that are normally acceptable are now touching the ground. So anytime those chains are touching the ground as it's traveling down the highway, it has the opportunity to throw sparks from that metal dragging across the asphalt. So we want to make sure we have the appropriate length chain. And some people will actually take old fabric or fire hoses or other items that they can get from hardware stores, and they'll actually encase that chain in that other fabric material. That way, if in the event of it actually coming in contact with the asphalt, it wouldn't throw sparks because it wouldn't be the metal striking the asphalt. And another thing with all of these items is just good basic cleaning and maintenance of our vehicles. A nice clean engine bay is not an oily engine bay. If we don't have an oily engine bay, it's less likely that that oil or other things there could ignite because of heat or sparks or other things. And so those are some of the things that we wanted to address. Those are some of the safety points that we wanted to mention on behalf of the Kern County Fire Department. And we hope that these points you find beneficial. And certainly, if you're operating a vehicle in certain areas of the nation, other countries, it's recommended that they have safety inspections on a regular basis. If you don't feel like you're mechanically inclined enough to do some of these checks, reach out to that neighbor, that good family friend, whoever it might be that you feel comfortable, that you can trust, that they can help walk you through some of these things to make sure they're done safely, or simply visit a mechanic and let them take on some of these things and see if they can at least steer you in the right direction to make sure that you're safe, your vehicle's operating as it should. That way you don't get yourself into trouble on that next trip that you make. And that's all I have by way of prepared slides for today, but I'd be happy to assist with any questions that we may have had.
Okay, well, nobody's put any questions in the chat, but I have something. I don't recall you talking about securing the oil and gas caps properly. Did you mention that? Because, you know, you drive along the road and you see people with their gas tank open and the cap is like flapping at the side. That makes me nuts.
Yeah, I did not mention that. And I think more and more, a lot of the manufacturers are going to a different system. It seems like the newer vehicles no longer have that cap. That is, it's a different setup completely. But you're right. It certainly does not hurt to make that double check. Look out the mirror. You may have to move around in that seat a little bit, but look down the length of your vehicle on both mirrors. Are all the doors shut? Is the gas cap in? We get into this dust cloud of activity sometimes. We have so many thoughts on our mind. We're just happy to just get a spot at the gas station, get it topped off. We're shocked by the prices, and then we're on the road again. But just a moment to just double check before you get in the vehicle to make sure that's certainly a good practice, as well as you said, the dipstick from the transmission, the oil, whatever it may be for the vehicle, to make sure it's seated in there properly, because there is a potential that because of vehicles getting hot, fluids expanding, that could actually come out through the dipstick if it's not actually seated in there correctly.
Okay, so you mentioned using the fire extinguisher, trying to put the fire out, but at some point, when do you decide that you need to back away? I mean, the car could explode. I've seen that happen actually. So at what point do you say it's time to back away from this?
That's going to have to come down to each individual's personal common sense. If we get out and we see a little bit of smoke and we see a couple little flames, generally speaking, we can safely use that extinguisher because we're not getting right on it. You're usually, maybe 5-8 feet away or so, spraying that fire extinguisher. So you're not having to get right into it. But if we're in a situation that we were barely able to get that vehicle off to the side of the road and there's fire every direction, our best bet in those situations is to get to a safe location away from that vehicle. And with any of these instances, call 911 as quickly as you can. The sooner that we can identify that there is a vehicle with a potential issue here, it's on fire, whether it's a small fire or large fire, as soon as we can get the equipment responding that direction, it's going to be better for everyone. And so each person will have to use that common sense. Once again, if it's a really small fire and you can extinguish it with an extinguisher, go for it. If it's growing quickly, stand back into a safe area, wait for the firefighters to arrive, and they will safely extinguish it.
Okay. And what about people who smoke in their cars? Because there's danger not only from people flicking the butts out the window, but smoking in the car in general doesn't seem like a wise thing to me.
Yeah, and I believe in California, unless it's changed, the laws in California, I believe, still state that an individual should not be smoking cigarettes in a vehicle with any minors in the vehicle. And that's oftentimes overlooked. And then, as you mentioned, there's upholstery, there's other things that could ignite. And individuals could potentially get in the habit of maybe flicking those cigarette butts out the window, which could ignite a fire. All of these things, when we look at the health aspect of it, it's discouraged to smoke. When we look at the potential for starting a fire in the fabric of the car, should discourage individuals from continuing with that practice. And we should care for our community. We should care for the area that we live in and not want to trash it. And so right then and there, we would not want to be flicking anything out of the vehicle, especially something that's in essence a match. Why would we flick a match out in California anywhere on our roadways? Because that's just begging for a fire to occur. So certainly never flick your cigarette butts out of a vehicle.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I think it should be considered distracted driving.
Okay.
And included under that law. Okay, I do have two more questions. What affect cars that are, well, I don't know what they call them now. We used to call them low riders that are really low to the ground. It's like, how dangerous is that?
I couldn't venture a guess on that, not being a mechanic. Some vehicles are able to use components that are certified and they're licensed and they're safe. They go through rigorous safety testing. But certainly anything that's modified to an extreme that runs the risk of not being able to handle the rigors of actually driving safely is not good for that person operating that vehicle and runs the potential of causing issues for others as well.
Yeah. And one more question, because we all know there are those idiots out there who know that they're driving in unsafe conditions and they figure, oh, nothing's going to happen to me, and they do it anyway. So what I want to know is, what is the liability to those people? What are they responsible if there's a fire from their reckless driving or just being irresponsible? Is there a fine? Are they responsible? Are they liable in any way if they start a fire?
Certainly, there are different means of cost recovery, but every one of these means of cost recovery would have to be viewed as a case-by-case basis with the negligence, the brazen conduct, whatever it may have been. So each case would have to be examined carefully on its own merits, but there are different ways through laws that are in place on into insurance companies that will go for cost recovery. Once again, though, this is kind of like flicking that cigarette butt out the window. We all need to continue to have a dialogue with our neighbors, with our community. We need to be good people for one another. And when we're doing certain practices, it's unfortunate to see that individuals lean to the selfish side of things, but maybe we can continue having dialogue with these individuals and encouraging them to maybe be a little bit more cautious and cognizant of what their actions could result in.
Yeah, I certainly agree. You can't do anything about stupidity, but constantly try to educate people. I mean, it's
Julia,
yes.
there are 2 questions in the chat room. I don't know if you saw them.
No, they just popped up. Okay. Awesome. So I know, Andrew, did you specifically talk about catalytic converters?
I mentioned them, and the thing with catalytic converters is that's something that you would want to see a mechanic about. We can visualize something from the exterior, and a lot of times there's a good indication if we see exhaust components that are misshapen, we hear odd sounds, we're seeing holes in different various exhaust components, we would definitely want to go take it to someone licensed that is a professional that could give us exact advice on how to address the situation. Other than that, I'm not aware of specifics offhand of telltale signs of being able to just visually look at something on the external side of the exhaust system, knowing, okay, this is no longer a good component. You would most likely need to see a professional about that, someone that's licensed and that could help us as a subject matter expert on those components.
Okay, and then another question is, what should off-road vehicle drivers do to prevent fires?
One of the things that they can do is to just be cautious with how they're operating their vehicles, making sure that they're maintained correctly. Oftentimes, vehicles that are just operating normally aren't out starting fires. It's usually once something deviates out of the normal operating ranges of that vehicle through use or through malfunction. That's when you see a vehicle fire that starts. That's when a vehicle fire then starts other vegetation on fire. We have incredible systems of off-road trails and many people that enjoy them. They care for those trails. They take their off-road vehicles on those trails. And we don't typically see that those are the individuals that are having issues with their vehicles and that are starting these fires. It's usually someone that's not thought the process through. They don't know the limits of their vehicle, or they've not cared for it as it should have been cared for. And that's when we tend to see the problems. So we're not here to say no one should go off road, but we are here to say, hey, definitely understand the limitations of your vehicle and make sure that the maintenance is done properly. And if you're doing both those things, there's a greatly reduced chance of a vehicle fire and thus a wildland fire.
So do you know, in Kern County in particular, are there specified off-road places where you can go and others that are off limits?
Correct. There are certain trails, and a lot of the people that are into that, they have the various groups. They'll sometimes plan group events. They'll go throughout the different areas throughout Kern County, throughout the state. There are certain trails that are only for off-highway vehicles. There are certain trails that are for all types of vehicles, off-road and off-highway vehicles. There are different trails that are easier to drive down that are similar to maybe just a dirt or gravel road, and other trails that are highly technical, large boulders that take vehicles that are highly adapted for those type of conditions to go through there safely. But most of those areas are marked. Individuals usually go online to Google the various areas for these off-roading areas throughout Kern County. I know that there's one, for example, on your way to Lake Isabella, as you drive 178, there's the Freeway Ridge Route. There's a big sign. It's maintained, and we have them actually all through our county.
Awesome. That's good to know. Okay, and then final question is, what type of fire extinguisher would you recommend to keep in your car?
Typically, like you'd want something that has an A, B, and C rating on it. So like a 10A, 2B, C is a typical size of fire extinguisher. And what that's stating is that that fire extinguisher can be used on ordinary combustibles. It can be used on flammable liquids. It can be used even on potential electrical fires, those sort of things. And that way, if it's gasoline that's dripping that's on fire, you can use that extinguisher. It's not going to spread the fire. If there's some electrical components that are starting a fire and it's arcing, typically it's safe to go ahead and use the extinguisher on that. It's not going to transfer. You're not going to get electrocuted through it. Or if it's just basic combustibles, woods, other fabrics, it would certainly work with those as well. You can usually get these at any hardware store. You can get them at Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, Costco, and typically those ones at those big box stores, they are there. They're not serviceable. They're inexpensive. You can get a small extinguisher, keep in your vehicle. And what we always recommend is once you're in that system of getting a fire extinguisher, when it gets to the point where it's time to, it's no longer good, it's out of service, we'll oftentimes do little practices with them. We'll flip a trash can upside down and pretend, okay, this trash can is a fire. I'm going to practice pulling my pin. I'm going to aim it at the base of the fire. I'm going to squeeze and I'm going to sweep back and forth. You remember pass is what you want to remember when you're using that fire extinguisher. And that way you can at least practice once a year, once every couple of years with that fire extinguisher. Then you're confident you've already used them without wasting them because they were out of service anyways and you needed to replace it. And now when an actual emergency occurs, you have a better idea of what, and someone in the chat said, can you repeat the type? It said 10A 2BC is typically what you try to accomplish, what you try to purchase.
Okay, that sounds good. So let's take a minute. If anybody has any more questions, this is a good time to post them in the chat. Otherwise, we will come to an end. No more questions? Well, that was great information. I just think a lot of this is information that it's common sense, but people overlook them. And many of us don't get any training at all, especially women don't really come across being trained to be auto mechanics or know what to do with the car. You know, I'm lucky I know how to put gas and oil in the car. I can check my radiator fluid, but other than that, I'm really not that savvy about cars. So it's really important to know what to look for and what we need to take it, because even if you take it to the mechanic, I find you have to ask them specifically to do these things, right? Otherwise, they don't know what you want. So, okay, so thank you so much for your expertise and your guidance in this topic. We really appreciate it. And okay, so before you go, now normally David Stenstrom does this, so I'm taking over for David today. So I have to read his notes here, and he would say, before you go, keep your eyes on our website, kernfiresafe.org. Our Go Bag giveaway will be starting soon. That's going to be really exciting. And it's going to be a Go Bag with a radio and some goodies in it, and it'll be a great start to getting your Go Bag together and get it ready and put it in your car, keep one in your house. what I've done is I put things that can go bad in the heat or the cold, I keep them in the go bag in the house. And the things that won't go bad, I keep it in the car. So I'm always ready, and I do have a fire extinguisher in my car, Andrew. So
Excellent.
I'm ready. Anyway, okay, the Go Bag giveaway is going to be starting soon. All you're going to need to do is take a short course from the Listos California 5 Steps to Preparedness course, and then we will get that Go Bag to you after you complete the course. And also our previous webinars are listed there, and we have lots of other information. We're populating our blog with articles. And if you have any topics you want us to cover, just let us know. We're happy to do that. Okay, so thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you being here this evening, and everybody, thank you for attending. And the fire is coming. Are you prepared? And I always want to say the earthquake's coming too, and the earthquake could start a fire, so you got to be doubly prepared. Okay, good night.